The recruitment sergeant had seen it all. Kids lying about their age, wannabe heroes, patriotic dreamers, but he'd never seen anything like this. A 52-year-old man with tears in his eyes, begging to serve again. Why? The sergeant asked. The answer came with two words that changed everything. They're dying. And suddenly, age didn't matter anymore. Welcome to Beneath Word Stories. Before we continue with this powerful tale of sacrifice, duty, and the courage to serve when others won't, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. The Army Recruitment Center in downtown Phoenix opened every morning at 8 a.m. sharp. Sergeant First Class Mike Torres had been running the place for 6 years, and in that time, he'd processed over 2,000 applications. Young men mostly, some women, all eager to serve their country in one way or another. He'd seen the cocky ones, the scared ones, the ones who thought military service was like a video game, and the rare few who understood what they were really signing up for. But he'd never seen anything like the man who walked through his doors on that Tuesday morning in October. The man was older, clearly in his 50s, with graying hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into harsh sunlight. He wore civilian clothes, jeans, a plain white t-shirt, and boots that had seen better days. His posture was straight, shoulders back, but there was something in his walk, a slight favor to his left leg, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. Torres looked up from his paperwork as the man approached his desk. The recruitment center was busy that morning. 3 18-year-olds sat in plastic chairs filling out forms, their parents hovering nearby with mixtures of pride and worry on their faces. "Good morning, sir," Torres said professionally. "How can I help you today?" The older man cleared his throat. "I'd like to enlist." The words hung in the air for a moment. Torres blinked, certain he'd misheard. Behind him, one of the young recruits snickered quietly to his friend. "I'm sorry, sir. Did you say enlist?" "Yes, Sergeant. I want to re-enlist in the United States Army." Torres set his pen down slowly. He'd had older men come in before, usually fathers asking questions about their son's service, or veterans looking for information about benefits. But this was different. This man was serious. "Sir, with all due respect, what's your age?" 52. Another snicker from the waiting area. Torres shot a warning glance in that direction before turning back to the man in front of him. "Mr. Johnson, Robert Johnson." "Mr. Johnson, I appreciate your patriotism, I really do. But the maximum age for Army enlistment is 35. Even with prior service, there are waivers." "But 52, Torres shook his head gently. "I'm afraid that's just not possible." Robert Johnson didn't move. He didn't argue or raise his voice. He just stood there, and Torres noticed something he hadn't before. The man's eyes. They weren't the eyes of someone easily discouraged. They were the eyes of someone who'd seen things, done things, survived things that most people never would. "Sergeant," Johnson said quietly, "I understand the regulations, but I'm not asking to be a frontline infantry soldier. I'm asking to serve in whatever capacity the Army will have me." Torres felt uncomfortable. There was something about this man's demeanor that commanded respect, even as the situation bordered on the absurd. "Sir, why do you want to enlist? At your age, you should be thinking about retirement, not military service." Johnson was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried across the room like a gunshot. "Because they're dying." The snickering stopped. The room went dead silent. Even the parents looked up from their phones. Torres leaned forward. "Who's dying, sir?" "The boys. The young men and women over there. In Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, places you can't pronounce and wouldn't want to visit." Johnson's hands, which had been steady at his sides, began to tremble slightly. "They're dying because they don't know what I know. They're dying because the men who should be teaching them are sitting in comfortable offices or retirement communities, telling war stories to each other instead of being where they're needed." Torres felt a chill run down his spine. "Sir, are you a veteran?" Johnson nodded once. 3 tours, 2 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. "What was your rank?" "Master Sergeant, Special Forces." The room seemed to shrink. Torres had been in the Army for 12 years, but he'd never deployed. He'd processed thousands of applications, but he'd never sat across from a Green Beret, especially not one who wanted to go back. "Master Sergeant, I understand your frustration. I really do. But the regulations exist for a reason. The physical demands of military service, the stress, the stress?" Johnson interrupted, and for the first time, there was an edge to his voice. "Sergeant, I've been blown up, shot at, and mortared more times than I can count. I've carried wounded soldiers through hostile territory, called in airstrikes on my own position, and watched friends die in my arms. You think the stress of military service is something I haven't considered?" Torres felt his face flush. Sir, I didn't mean— I know what you meant. Johnson's voice softened again. And you're not wrong. I'm not the man I was at 25 or even 35. I'm slower. I tire more easily, and my knees sound like Rice Krispies when I get out of bed in the morning. One of the young recruits actually smiled at that. But, Johnson continued, I know things that those boys over there need to know. I can teach them how to spot an ambush before it happens, how to read the terrain, how to work with local populations. I can show them how to stay alive long enough to come home to their families. Torres looked down at his desk, then back up at Johnson. Sir, even if I wanted to help you, and believe me, I respect what you're trying to do, I don't have the authority to waive age restrictions like that. It would have to come from much higher up the chain of command. Then let's call higher up the chain of command. Torres blinked. Sir, you heard me. Call your boss. Call his boss. Call whoever you need to call. I'll wait. Torres looked around the room. The young recruits and their parents were hanging on every word. This wasn't exactly standard procedure, but then again, nothing about this situation was standard. Master Sergeant Johnson, even if I made those calls, even if someone was willing to listen, the chances of getting approval for something like this are essentially zero. Johnson reached into his back pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he extracted a small piece of paper, a photograph creased and faded from years of being carried. He placed it on Torres's desk. It was a picture of 8 men in desert camouflage, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning, despite the dust and exhaustion visible on their faces. They looked young, confident, invincible. That was my team, Johnson said quietly. Afghanistan, 2009. Best group of soldiers I ever had the privilege to serve with. Torres picked up the photo, studying the faces. Johnson was in the center, younger, but unmistakably the same man, his arm around a soldier who couldn't have been more than 22. That's Danny Martinez, Johnson said, pointing to the young soldier. Kid from El Paso, wanted to be a teacher when he got out. Smart as hell, brave as they come, but green. So damn green. Torres waited. I spent 6 months training that team before we deployed. 6 months teaching them everything I knew about staying alive in a combat zone. How to read the local population, how to spot IEDs, how to move through hostile territory without getting killed. Johnson pointed to another face in the photo. That's Mike Chen, engineer from California. Could build anything, fix anything. Had a girlfriend back home he was planning to marry. Torres noticed that Johnson was speaking about them in past tense. This is Tommy Rodriguez, medic. Saved my life twice. Saved all our lives more times than I can count. Had 3 kids back in Texas. Johnson's voice began to crack slightly. They all made it through that deployment because I taught them what I knew. Every single one of them came home alive because some old-timer had taken the time to pass on what he'd learned the hard way. Torres looked up from the photo. Where are they now? Johnson was quiet for a long moment. Danny's teaching high school in El Paso. Mike married that girlfriend and they have 2 kids. Tommy's working as a paramedic in San Antonio. He paused. They're alive, Sergeant. They're alive because someone who'd been there before showed them how to survive. Torres handed the photo back. That's a hell of a thing, Master Sergeant. It is. And right now, there are teams over there. Young soldiers, good soldiers, who don't have that advantage. They're learning the hard way, if they live long enough to learn at all. Johnson put the photo back in his wallet. I'm not asking the Army to make me 25 again. I'm not asking to lead assaults or jump out of airplanes. I'm asking to teach, to train, to pass on what I know before it dies with me in some retirement community in Florida. Torres found himself nodding. The logic was undeniable, even if the regulations didn't allow for it. Master Sergeant, what you're describing sounds more like a contractor position. The military uses a lot of civilian contractors for training and advisory roles. Have you looked into that? Johnson shook his head. I've tried. The contracting companies want younger guys, or they want you to have connections, or they want you to be willing to work for peanuts. And even if I got a contract, I'd be limited in what I could do, where I could go. He leaned forward again. I don't want to be a contractor, Sergeant. I want to be a soldier. I want to wear the uniform again, take the oath again, be part of something bigger than myself again. Torres was quiet for several minutes, thinking. Finally, he looked up. Master Sergeant Johnson, I'm going to make a phone call. I can't promise anything, but I'm going to try. Johnson nodded. That's all I'm asking for. Torres picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. Colonel Peterson, this is Sergeant Torres at the Phoenix recruiting station. Sir, I have an unusual situation here that I think you need to hear about. As Torres explained the situation, Johnson waited patiently. The young recruits and their parents listened in fascination. This wasn't what any of them had expected when they walked into a recruiting office that morning. After about 10 minutes, Torres hung up the phone. Well, Johnson asked, Colonel Peterson wants to meet with you. Tomorrow morning, 0800 hours at Luke Air Force Base. He's bringing someone from Special Operations Command. Johnson's eyes widened slightly. SOCOM. Apparently, word of your situation has already reached some people who are very interested in talking to you. Torres smiled. I can't guarantee anything, but it sounds like you might have gotten someone's attention. Johnson stood up slowly, extending his hand to Torres. Thank you, Sergeant. I know this wasn't easy. Torres shook his hand. Master Sergeant, I hope this works out for you. I really do. As Johnson turned to leave, one of the young recruits called out to him. Sir, that photo you showed, those guys you trained, do you really think you could teach us stuff like that? Johnson stopped and turned around. He looked at the young man, barely 18, nervous but trying to hide it, probably shipping out to basic training within a few weeks. Son, what's your name? Jackson, sir. Tyler Jackson. Tyler, how old are you? 18, sir. Johnson nodded. When I was 18, I thought I knew everything there was to know about being a soldier. I was wrong. When I was 25, I thought I'd learned everything there was to learn. I was wrong again. It took me 23 years to realize that the most important thing a soldier can know is that he doesn't know everything. Tyler nodded eagerly. If I get the chance, if the Army gives me the chance, I'll teach you everything I can. Not because I want to be a hero, but because I don't want you to have to learn it the way I did. How did you learn it, sir? Johnson was quiet for a moment. By watching good soldiers die because they didn't know what they needed to know. The room fell silent again. Tyler, what's your MOS going to be? Infantry, sir. 11 Bravo. Johnson nodded. Good. The infantry needs good men, but promise me something. Yes, sir. When you deploy, not if when. Remember that the enemy isn't stupid, and he's not playing by the same rules you are. Listen to your NCOs, especially the older ones who've been there before. Ask questions, even if you think they make you look weak. And never ever assume that because something worked yesterday, it's going to work today. Tyler was hanging on every word. Yes, sir, I will. Johnson looked around the room at the other young faces watching him. That goes for all of you. The uniform doesn't make you invincible. Training doesn't make you invincible. The only thing that might keep you alive is learning from the people who've survived what you're about to face. He turned back to Torres. Sergeant, thank you again. I'll see you after my meeting tomorrow. As Johnson walked toward the door, Tyler called out one more time. Sir, I hope they let you back in. Johnson stopped at the door and looked back. For the first time since he'd entered the recruiting station, he smiled. So do I, son. So do I. The next morning, Master Sergeant Robert Johnson walked into a conference room at Luke Air Force Base wearing his old dress uniform. It still fit, though it was a little tighter around the middle than it used to be. His ribbons and decorations told the story of a career spent in the most dangerous places on Earth. Sitting around the table were Colonel Peterson, a representative from Special Operations Command, and a civilian from the Department of the Army. The meeting lasted 3 hours. 6 weeks later, the Army announced a new pilot program, the Veteran Mentor Initiative. Selected retired Special Forces personnel would be brought back to active duty in an advisory capacity, working directly with deploying units to provide real-world training and mentorship. The program's first volunteer was Master Sergeant Robert Johnson. He was 52 years old when he put the uniform back on. Too old, according to the regulations. Too broken, according to his medical file. Too stubborn to quit, according to everyone who knew him, but not too old to serve. Over the next 2 years, Johnson trained over 300 soldiers before their deployments. He taught them how to read the terrain, how to work with local populations, how to spot danger before it found them. The casualty rates for units that went through his training dropped by 60%. When asked about the program's success, Johnson always gave the same answer. I'm not saving heroes. I'm just making sure they get the chance to become heroes. Tyler Jackson was one of the first soldiers to go through Johnson's training program. He deployed to Afghanistan in 2019 and returned home safely 8 months later. He's now a staff sergeant, and he's training new soldiers using the techniques Johnson taught him. The photo of Johnson's original team still sits on his desk, but now it's joined by dozens of others. Pictures of young soldiers who came through his training, learned what he had to teach, and made it home to their families. Johnson is 54 now. He's still serving, still teaching, still making sure that the lessons learned in blood aren't forgotten by the next generation. Because sometimes being too old to fight means you're exactly the right age to teach others how to survive. Sometimes the most important service you can give your country isn't charging into battle. It's making sure the ones who do have every possible advantage. And sometimes age really is just a number. So I ask you, have you ever met someone who refused to let age, regulations, or circumstances keep them from serving a cause bigger than themselves? Someone who understood that experience isn't just about what you've done, but about what you can teach others to do. Share their story in the comments. Tell us about the mentors, the teachers, the stubborn old veterans who refused to quit quit when everyone said they should. Because here at Beneath Word Stories, we believe that the most powerful weapon in any soldier's arsenal isn't youth or strength or speed. It's wisdom earned through service and shared with the next generation. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel and help us share more stories of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable spirit of those who serve. And remember, you're never too old to make a difference. You're never too experienced to learn something new. And you're never too far from service to find a way to serve again. We'll see you in the next story.